Good evening. Welcome to Talk of the Town. I'm your host, David Frankel. With me tonight again is Rory Schuler, my co-host. Good evening, Rory.
Good evening, Dave.
Always good to see you here.
Good to see you.
Another busy week.
Yes.
Very full paper, I notice.
Very full.
And tonight our special guest is Jason Lewis, who's running for the Middlesex seat that's been vacated by Paul Casey, and we're getting right down close to the wire for this election.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's a great pleasure to have you on. I went to the debate last night. Oh, I do want to mention before we go forward, anybody that wants to phone in for questions to Jason or to either of us, the phone number is 781-721-2050. We have to give people a shot at doing this. That's 781-721-2050. So we'll be able to take the call right here, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. But over to you, Jason. It must be getting exciting, getting close to election day, and such a lot going on, not just locally, but nationally, regionally.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts?
It's hard to believe. It's less than 2 weeks to go until Election Day, November 4th, and it's a very big day for our communities and for our country. I think there's a lot of very important decisions to be made, starting obviously with our next president, but also here in Massachusetts we've got some very important ballot questions that will be decided, and then very locally we have our state representative race.
Indeed. I went to the debate last night, and that was sort of reasonably peaceful, not too many gotcha moments. But what are your thoughts on what came up in the debate yesterday?
Well, first thing I would say is I'm very pleased we actually had an opportunity to have two debates, as you know, and so I think we gave the voters in Stoneham and Winchester a really good opportunity to ask a lot of questions of the candidates. The questions were different from the first debate to the second, so we got to cover even more issues, and it gave the candidates a chance also to question one another, so we had a good mix. I thought both debates had a very civil, respectful tone. I thought they were substantive. We really did tackle, I think, the important issues. We talked a lot about local aid, Chapter 70 funding. We talked about our schools. We talked about what we need to do for our seniors.
Yeah, I thought that
talked about healthcare.
The two-tier real estate tax idea was an interesting idea, and I think the wrinkle on it was somewhat means-tested, but that people over 65 would pay on a lower tier unless they were particularly well off, I guess. Was that sort of the gist of it?
I think that was the gist of it. I think we're all struggling with this fundamental challenge, which is really in the last 5 years, or since 2002, more of the burden of funding municipal services, in particular education, has been shifting onto property taxes. Yeah. The state reduced local aid by hundreds of millions of dollars in 2002, and that really just passed the buck down onto the backs of cities and towns. So there's been, property taxes have been going up, there's been all this pressure, as everyone knows, to pass overrides, and there's also been cuts in municipal services. So we're struggling with how to rectify this, and at the local level, there are programs that help our seniors. There's a circuit breaker program that we, in Winchester, for example, the interest rate on property tax deferments was voted recently by town meeting to a lower rate, which I think was very, very helpful. Yes. But we need to do more. It's not enough. I've talked with many seniors as I've been campaigning over the last 8 months, going door to door, and it's heartbreaking to hear from people who've lived in the community, many of them their whole lives, grown up here, and are feeling that it's just getting too expensive to stay. Property taxes and other cost of living as well. So we do have to do more, and I would look at all options, including enhancing the circuit breaker and other ways to just make it more affordable. But I do think fundamentally we are going to have to, over the coming years, we're going to have to reform how we pay for public education in Massachusetts, which is at the core of all of this.
I think that issue may be about to blow up, atomic style, depending on the result of ballot question 1 and whether or not that passes.
Oh my God, yes, that would be it would really create a crisis.
It really is the ballot question I hear everybody talking about right now, and even people like myself are starting to wonder whether or not this is a time to cast a vote for me or for everybody else. Selfishly, I look at how many state services I rely on personally.
Yeah.
Single guy renting. Yeah, of course, if this passes and the budget takes a hit that it may take, rents may eventually catch up because the landlords are struggling as well, and property taxes may swell. But then again, when I look at how many state services I personally rely on, a good friend of mine says, you know, I want my state services a la carte. I'm willing to pay for them when I get them. And then there is that fiscal responsibility argument, you know. With less, perhaps they'll figure out how to do more. So I would just wonder how, especially somebody in your role who may be in a spot to make some decisions on Beacon Hill, how you feel that all this planning, all this you know, crunch time, trying to figure out how the system works exactly, how possibly to make it work better. Do you feel like it may be about to be turned on its ear completely, and you may just have to reconsider everything if this ballot question passes?
Well, we have to take it very seriously. I mean, this very similar question was on the ballot several years ago, and it received 40-some%. I don't remember the exact number.
Holy hell, really?
40-some% of the voters, more than 40%.
Very close.
It was
much closer than anybody
much
had
closer
expected
than
at the
anybody
time.
expected. Exactly. So we have to take this very, very, very seriously, and I think people are struggling, and I think people are understandably saying, well, if I could save money and I didn't have to pay these taxes, that's money I could use to pay the heating bill and my other expenses. But I think that what we don't want to do, I mean, we need to take a scalpel to our budget. Obviously, our state budget's in deficit, but this would be a hatchet. And the impact, I believe, and from all the experts I've talked to, would be devastating, as you were pointing out. And the impact on our schools, on local aid would be devastated, healthcare, public safety, infrastructure spending, and the basic social safety net that we have to the fabric of our community would be at risk. So
I do hear a lot of arguments
it's very risky.
of all-out devastation, but at the same time, I look at my paycheck and I would love to see 20% more added, especially since I finally got into our 401k plan this past week. I decided, you know, maybe this was the time. You know, after over a year of just wasting all those matching funds, I thought, you know, the market might be low enough now that if I get in the money that I do start putting in. So I got my first
Might
paycheck.
actually not be going into the toilet.
Well, yeah, maybe not. But I got my first paycheck this week minus my 401k funds, and you know, I have to tell you, I'm really right there on the fence. You know, I can understand finally how somebody could be undecided about some sort of issue at the polls up to 2 weeks before going, because now I'm looking at this as possibly I could vote for, you know, it may be selfish, but a little bit of self-preservation, and I'm sure that I'm not alone in that spot. Or I could look out for my common man, my fellow Massachusetts resident. I really haven't made up my mind which is the smarter choice, and I probably won't.
Well, I hope you'll decide to vote for in support of your community and our community. I do think also, in addition to severe cuts in a lot of basic public services that we all rely on for education, for healthcare, roads, police officers, firefighters, the other thing that's going to happen is there's going to be even more pressure on more aggressive taxes, and particularly property taxes, because cities and towns, certainly Winchester and Stoneham, are going to try to make up some of this lost state aid, and that's going to result in even more pressure for property tax overrides. It's going to be even more divisive in our communities, and also at the state level, other taxes like sales taxes, which again are, I believe, not the fairest way to raise the revenues we need. So
Is the gas tax
I
federal?
urge you to still
Is the
consider
gas tax
that.
I believe there's
federal or
a
state?
federal and a state portion
There's
of the
federal
gas
and
tax.
state for the gas tax
Personally,
as
I'm all
well,
for
right?
raising gas taxes dramatically, because with the oil prices dropping down, we're in great danger of falling right back into the same bad habits of consuming lots of imported oil and de-incentivizing the creation of alternative energy.
Well, see, that really is the whole point, right? All of us, unless we have, you know, outstanding circumstances, we all have to work. So whether or not we give the slice right off the top, we hand the portion of our paycheck over to the government, keep our fingers crossed, hope that they do what they should with it, hope that they treat it, you know, they're fiscally responsible, or perhaps we're forced into coming up with a new system, something that doesn't take our money before we get our hands on it. takes it this way, hands it back to us and say, okay, well, here's the 20% sales tax. You can easily cut that out of your life if you can minimize your consumer nature.
Well, there have been advocates of an
I think
all-consumption
that's,
tax. In fact,
yeah.
my father was a great advocate of a progressive consumption tax, that the more you consume, the higher rate you paid, although unless it was all electronic, it would be hard to administer that. But that, in principle, was a good idea, because that way, that essentially the community is baking a pie, if you think of it in those terms. Why disincentivize anybody from contributing? Because when you work, you're contributing to it. It's the consumption is when you take from the pie. So the more you take, perhaps the more you should be disincentivized up to a point. It's sort of an
I mean,
interesting
there are
balance.
some reasonable arguments there, as long as we make sure that it's not regressive, because
Well, that's
for the
the sort
least
of
well off in our
progressive
society, there's a lot
nature.
of basic expenses you have. You have your food and your clothing and shelter, and so
Right,
we want to
exactly.
make sure that that's
You'd have to build a
you're not
curve.
paying 20% tax on your groceries.
And honestly, I'm not completely certain that I'll handle that extra $100 or $200 on my paycheck every other week more responsibly than the government will. You always hope that you would, but I know how I am.
Well, it's certainly a
Perhaps,
lot better than some of the major insurance companies and investment banks, apparently.
There
Could it
you
do
raise-
worse, right?
I do think
That's
though.
right. I don't think so.
I do think you're raising a very important point, which there is, and I've seen this from so many people I've been talking to. There is this distrust, this cynicism in our government that is so pervasive, and government at all levels. And I think it certainly starts with what's happened in Washington the last 8 years, and even to some extent before that. It's not necessarily a partisan issue, and I think there's a lot of work we have ahead of us to rebuild that trust in our government, that these are people who are there to serve their constituents, that they're ethical, that they're doing things on a principled basis and doing the best they can to tackle tough issues. I mean, I'm hopeful that's why I'm running. That's my motivation. I haven't run for elected office before, and maybe I can do my small part to bring that kind of respect and sort of trust in our government leaders. I think it's critical to tackling these challenging issues that are ahead of us.
One thing I found out, I was down in Washington these last couple of days, and Barney Frank came and spoke at the function I was at.
Yes.
There appears that the part of the stimulus package is going to be to give large Medicaid reimbursements back to the states, so that they free up some of the funds that are getting buried by Medicaid, which is sort of getting to be out of control, so that they're in a better position with their otherwise declining incomes to cope with what's going on. So I'm not sure, as everybody is now looking to slash and burn their state budgets, that they yet have all the information they're going to need, because if everybody slash and burns, we're going to have pretty close to a depression.
Well, it is
and
unfortunate
they want to
that
avoid
we
that.
And they want to avoid that.
can't
That's right.
settle the
Yes.
presidential election
Yeah.
before we vote on ballot question 1, because I think everybody has to realize that if Democrats are in control on the national level, then chances are the dry wells from the last 8 years will start filling up again slowly with water as the federal government maybe fulfills some of those unfunded mandates, starts returning money
Right.
to the local towns and governments and state governments.
Well, I'm hopeful with the change in administration, we will have a different set of policies that will help our states and will fund mandates, for example. But I do think we have to be realistic, where whoever comes in as our next president is facing unprecedented budget deficits, is still facing enormous expenses fighting 2 wars. And now this bailout that we
Well, I
have
think
to
one of
fund.
those is going to get the chop.
And potentially our economic growth slowing down. So I just think we have to temper all of our expectations, and so I think it's prudent that our governor and our state legislature is moving quickly to say, well, we're going to have to do some belt tightening, and these are tough decisions, but we have to make them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I thought maybe we should dive into a story that we ran in today's Star.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Just in case any of Jason's opponents are watching, there was a story today. Essentially, let me go back to the origins of this story. The story's headline, Slung Mud Fact Check.
But this one here?
It's on the front page. About 2 weeks ago, actually exactly 2 weeks ago, Kim Whitaker was sitting here. Kim is volunteering with Jason's campaign. on an occasional basis. And, Kim held me to task for 2 press releases that I ran side by side. One of these press releases was from the Riley campaign describing his endorsement by the Stoneham Selectmen, or at least several of the members of the Board of Selectmen in Stoneham. And it ran side by side against a press release from Jason's campaign, more than 20 endorsements that he received. I had asked Jason's campaign to compile them into one to make it a little bit easier to run. In those stories, arguably, especially in the press release from Riley's camp, there were a lot of accusations. It wasn't the first time accusations were made, but they were heavily attributed to the campaign. Didn't seem to me that there was anything glaringly factually wrong with them. But at least the discussion of, maybe not being able to check every word of every press release that we run, just staffing concerns, all the excuses in the world that I can think of. But the importance was that perhaps there are a lot of accusations being thrown around in this campaign that need to be thoroughly checked. So, just almost instantly after that conversation, or actually shortly before Kim and I had that conversation, I had put our reporter Eric Tetzi on the assignment of looking into some of the accusations that were made on both sides. At least were they concerned campaign finance and who's being supported from outside of the towns of Winchester and Stoneham, right, and whose support seems to be coming from within. Chad Riley had made a lot of accusations that Jason's campaign was more funded from people from San Francisco, New York, and Washington, D.C., I think were the 3 main cities that he named.
Some mysterious
hotbeds of liberal. But the important thing was we decided to check on these. Of course,
not to mention the local liberal media.
I failed to maybe expand the scope of this story because there were so many smears that have been thrown around in this campaign from the very beginning, from the labeling of Jason, the fact that you're a socialist, and on
no,
to
don't give those givers. The fact was he was accused of being a socialist.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking everybody has just seen our first show, which followed on the heels of the advertisement that was actually in the Star, that showed a faceless torso in a suit with 2 buttons. One said socialist, the other one said Jason Lewis.
Well, let's pause there for a second. We'll ask you the hard question, Jason. Are you a socialist?
Well, the answer is I'm certainly not a socialist. I think
that's necessarily a bad thing, by the way.
Well, it is sort of interesting that the same charges that are being thrown at me right here in Stoneham and Winchester are being thrown out there against
the national political
Senator Obama. Right, it really is remarkable that
and even Ben Bernanke and Jed Paulson,
that people in our politics resort to these kinds of charges. So.
Well, if you could, for us and our viewers, Jason, perhaps you can explain. I know that you've seen at least the roots or are familiar with the reasons why Chad has drawn this correlation of, of calling you a socialist. So if you could tell us about Mass Alliance and their role in your campaign and the small section of that organization that does, have a socialist group involved. If you could tell us a little bit about
Sure, I'm happy. In fact, these charges were thrown at me a number of months ago in the Democratic primary. I addressed them then, and the voters, without hesitation, rejected them in the Democratic primary last month. So let's be clear about the facts. I have been endorsed in my campaign by a number of organizations, statewide advocacy groups. This is in addition to the more than 20 local elected officials and community leaders here in Stoneham and Winchester that you mentioned, Rory. Those organizations, one of those is an organization known as Mass Alliance. Mass Alliance is simply a coalition of about 20 groups, including teachers, nurses, social workers, civil rights advocates, women's rights advocates, environmental groups. And these are people that I've been talking to as I've been door knocking since the beginning of this year almost every day. They're the people that make up our communities, and they're the values that they believe in are the same values that are shared by the majority of residents in Stoneham and Winchester.
Could you give us a sampling of those?
Sure. Those are good public schools for our children, working for more affordable quality health care for everybody, working for sustainable environmental policies that balance economic growth with preserving our environment, and really working for a better quality of life for working families. Decent jobs, good salaries, a basic social safety net when you lose your job or you lose your health care. And those, again, those are the values that certainly I hold dear, and from all the people I've been talking to, those are the values that I believe we share with the vast majority of Stoneham and Winchester residents. So I'm proud to have their support, and we'll continue to work hard to deliver on those basic values.
Mr. Riley has also touched upon another group, and maybe if you could also explain, it's a slightly different name, mass equality.
Mm-hmm.
How does mass equality factor into your
Mm-hmm.
campaign?
Mm-hmm.
And who is Samantha King,
Mm-hmm.
and what does she have to do with your campaign?
Sure. Mass Equality, for those who don't know, is an organization that works for equal marriage rights in the state, and was part of the successful movement to have equal marriage, which I certainly support as a basic issue of fairness and respect, a civil rights issue, in fact, for all people. The person you mentioned that Chad Riley has thrown out there was served as my campaign manager for a few months early in the campaign, and was received a salary. Then she left the campaign because she wanted to take a full-time job, and we were only able to offer a part-time. She left to take a full-time position with Mass Equality. So she now is an employee of Mass Equality and is paid by Mass Equality, and has absolutely no relationship with my campaign. So these are completely not connected. Mass Equality has endorsed my candidacy and has made a contribution to the campaign, but this has nothing to do with directing my campaign or certainly funding my campaign or any of these charges.
This may actually be one of the really big issues that possibly should have gotten more spotlight in the last few months, is mass equality, and just the the efforts to get the amendment on this ballot that failed, and the efforts against that. I know that the predecessor to the seat, Representative Casey, his feelings on the subject of gay marriage were somewhat conflicted. I remember at one time I had said that, or referred to Paul Casey as being, anti-gay marriage, but he did point out to me once that it's not that he's anti-gay marriage, but he was pro having the voters decide on this issue.
But on the whole, Paul was socially conservative, you have to say.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, just to put somebody's civil rights up to referendum, for a vote, to me is an uncomfortable idea. But this is something that a lot of people feel very strongly about.
Yeah.
But at very least, not many lines have been drawn to separate the candidates who are currently running from the man who one of them is going to replace. But I do understand that this was discussed last night at the debate, and I thought maybe at least from my understanding, I think basically it was 2-1. That Brian O'Connor and Chad Riley felt similar on this topic, and the use of
Chad was kind of pro, was for pretty much leaving the civil union okay. That sort of generalized statement that marriage is between a man and a woman, for which read, I'm okay with civil rights, but I'm not okay with gay marriage. And then Brian O'Connor was very, very underspoken on the subject. He basically said, I've been married for 41 years. I believe that marriage is between a man and woman, but I'm not about to overturn the decisions of the courts and so forth. So I support the law. For which read, between the lines, is I clearly wouldn't have been in favour of this, but I'm not going to try and overturn it.
I see. What was your answer to that?
Well, I've been very clear on this issue from day one. It's I put it on my website when I began running, because I believe in being as open and transparent as possible on all issues, not just the easy ones, but the controversial ones. My view is that this is it's an issue of basic fairness and respect and treating people with decency. And so I do support equal marriage rights, and I disagreed with Chad Riley in the debate. I do not believe this issue should be put before the voters, because I don't believe we should vote on other people's civil rights. And to me, it's as simple as that. And I think that that is a difference between myself and the other candidates. But you know, I would urge us to move on from this issue. Frankly, I think it was decided. I'm hopeful that we're going to move on. We've got so many bigger challenges that are facing our state, the fiscal issues, what's going to happen with healthcare reform in Massachusetts. We embarked on major healthcare reform a few years ago, and it's under enormous stress to maintain that. Our infrastructure, as we all know about, is crumbling. You know, I'm hopeful that those are what we're going to really focus on, and we're going to get past some of these divisive issues that
why don't
distract
we
us.
switch our scope and set our sights on healthcare? We have somewhat of a wounded fledgling healthcare plan trying to take off in the state of Massachusetts, creating larger deficits than were originally planned. A seed that was maybe not necessarily planted, but at least watered fairly frequently when it was very young by former Governor Mitt Romney, you know, who sort of left the state and has now disavowed his contact with the East Coast. But I wonder how you feel about the healthcare plan that was put in place under Romney, how it's turned out, and maybe what needs to be changed, if anything, about that.
Well, I wish he wouldn't run away from it, because I do think the rest of the country is looking at what we're doing here, and they're trying to figure out if this is going to make sense for other states as well. And I think it's a very important leadership position that Massachusetts has taken on this very critical issue. First thing that I would say is I believe that healthcare should be a fundamental basic human right. To me, this is, I put it together with education. I believe every person should receive a good public education and should have access to basic, affordable, quality health care. And I think it's a disgrace that in our country, the richest country in the world, we have millions and millions, close to 50 million people who are not insured, don't have health care.
Poorer than any other Western country, essentially.
Much poorer than any other Western country. And at the same time that we don't provide health care for so many of our citizens, we also spend in many cases 50% to 100% more, right, than other countries.
Could you speak a bit more to that issue? Because insuring, purely dealing with the insurance side doesn't address the fundamental bloating of costs in the whole the healthcare delivery system and the pharmaceuticals.
And that's exactly, and that's the problem we're facing now. Is I think the reform we put in place did address the issue of universal coverage and getting everybody into the system. But what it really did not do a good job of addressing is the costs, and that's the single biggest budget buster that's facing us. It's facing local government, state government, federal government, businesses, and consumers. So that's the next big frontier, I believe, here in Massachusetts and across the country, is tackling cost. And that's going to be much harder in many ways than just requiring everyone to have
very
health
strong
care.
lobbies who are protecting
there's a lot of
high margins.
That's right. There's a lot of vested interests, whether it's healthcare providers, whether it's pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies that make a lot of money. Yeah. You know, we spend with more than 10% of our GDP on healthcare. That's a lot. So that's going to have to be the focus of our policymakers in the coming years.
And to me, philosophically, this plan, you know, while perhaps good intentioned, missed the philosophical point that they tried to get a universal health plan established. But the way they did that was by threatening to essentially fine those individuals who didn't get health care. So to me, it makes little sense to say to those people in our population who either don't have health care through their employer, hadn't felt like they could, I mean, who wouldn't have health care if they could easily? But to threaten a fine on top of, you know, not getting health care, it felt to me like the motivations were askew. That maybe it was being approached just from the wrong way. Instead of, you know, getting everybody covered, bringing everybody into the same pool, it was get in the pool or we're going to fine you. but I don't know. That
Right.
could be just simplifying the.
Well, I think you raise a concern that a lot of people have raised about just the individual mandate and the fact that people are in fact being fined, and those fines are going up. They're quite steeply if you don't. But I think, to be fair, it was a compromise. It brought together a lot of different constituents: government, businesses, healthcare providers, consumer groups, and so it was a compromise. And compromises are never perfect. But I believe at least it was an important step forward. And there was also
established the principle of
and it established the
universality,
principle
even though it was a
of-
lousy way to do it, I thought, but-
perhaps, but it did also set up the Connect, a new organization, the Connector, which is for those who are having a hard time affording it. At least there's an ability to get subsidized health insurance. And the idea is also that a lot of these people will now have basic care. They can seek preventative care. It'll keep more people out of emergency rooms when they don't,
Which would cut costs,
which is
right there.
much more expensive. And then we all bear those costs, because when people can't pay for health care, end up in emergency rooms, we as taxpayers all bear that cost. So
Goes
there
right into those
is
premiums.
Was an interesting study that came out this
as premium
week, though.
payers, it raises our premiums. That's right. So that should help bring down costs over time.
An interesting study came out this week that says really the claim that uninsured individuals are at least contributing to very long lines in emergency rooms and a lot of emergency room money. Those uninsured people may not necessarily be to blame, because they're actually not getting to the emergency room until they're very sick, which means they actually have emergencies. You know, it's actually the people who are insured who can get in to see their family practice provider, because they need 3 days to 6 weeks advance notice to get an appointment with a doctor in Massachusetts. That it's those individuals going to the emergency rooms that are actually clogging it up. And
Right.
if anything, there's definitely a major problem in this state with just getting a general practitioner, and the practitioners are leaving, flooding out of the state, hemorrhaging.
Why
Well,
is that?
you raise a very good point there. Yes.
What-
We do. Well, I think you're right. We have a
What's the
chronic
cause?
shortage of primary care physicians, and that is.
Is that because of their
it's-
basic overheads are high here?
I
or-
think that's part of it, and also that the economics for, I've talked to a lot of doctors about this, for physicians is just so skewed towards specialists. I mean, you come out of medical school with enormous debts, and if you go into a specialty, become a heart surgeon, brain surgeon, radiologist, you make far more than you do as a primary care physician. So I think as a society, we're not valuing the services of our primary care physicians as much as we should, and maybe we're overvaluing what we pay to radiologists, for example. So I think that's going to have to change, and I think there's opportunities even for our policymakers at the state level to provide, for example, maybe some loan payback or forgiveness programs. You know, if doctors go into primary care practice, particularly in underserved parts of the state, we can provide some help or some incentives so that we can encourage more primary care. Because ultimately, that will actually be a good investment for the state, because if we have more primary care doctors, more people seek care before their condition becomes chronic, they won't end up in the emergency room and will actually end up paying less in healthcare costs.
I don't know why they don't have more of these walk-in clinics as an alternative to emergency room, because ER is set up for really high-level trauma, and for a lot of people go to ER that are not in a high-level trauma situation, it's because it's the weekend and their doctor's not around, or they can't get an appointment.
That's why across the nation they've started
right.
opening walk-in clinics
Yes.
and 24-hour Walmarts.
And that's right.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
They,
It makes better economic sense.
as long as they can, as long as they're appropriately
Staffed.
regulated for good patient safety and staffed by qualified nurse practitioners, I
mean,
think
if
they
you-
are a good addition to bring down
the
healthcare
mix.
costs, and they're very convenient. They're very convenient
Absolutely.
when you need to see a.
Here's a question. The whole structure of what was done in Massachusetts is in stark contrast to when you look at Australia, Canada, France, even England, which I thought went too far. But basically, the single payer system, and you have essentially a single payer system already in place here with Medicaid and Medicare. What would be wrong with just universalizing like Medicare with something very similar to Australia, where you just take a small percentage out of the out of payroll. The way they do it there is a percent, it's like 2% of payroll, gets you that base cover. It doesn't give you everything. You can go to private insurance to top it up. That means everybody's covered.
Right.
And the insurance pool, therefore, is universal and huge as a result.
Right.
I've never understood why there was such an allergic reaction to that here.
Well, I think one of the unfortunate misperceptions is that whenever that comes up, people assume it means the S word again, that it's socialized medicine, that
has nothing to do with the delivery system.
They're completely different things. I mean, there are countries where, like Canada or England, where
they did get closer to a
doctors and healthcare providers do work for the government, and so that is
not so in Australia.
But that's not, as you said, not so in Australia. That's not so in Germany or France or many other countries that have very good healthcare and at a much lower cost than we do. So I think that's the first problem with it, is that it always brings up that.
Anyway, it's a myth that the doctors set the price here. The damn insurance companies set the price.
Insurance companies do. That's
and
right.
And they can be a lot harsher than a universal scheme, actually.
Yeah, I think the challenge we have is we just have it's such a large part of our economy, and it's not something that's easy to go from where we are today to something that would be such significant change. Which is why I think that what has been done in Massachusetts, even though it's not perfect, as you said, Rory, it is a very important step forward, because at least it's starting to tackle some of the things that are broken with our healthcare system, and at least starting with getting people all in the system and covered with and universal coverage. The next thing, regardless of what kind of payment system we have, is we've got to tackle the cost side. So I think that's going to need to be the focus for the next stage of reform.
It looks very likely that one of your alumni are going to become president of the US. You went to Harvard.
Yes.
He's a Harvard graduate. What impact can you see between an Obama presidency and the outcome for Winchester and for the state? How is that going to be different from a McCain presidency?
Well, I'm certainly a strong supporter of Obama for our next president. I think he's enormously qualified. He's the intelligence he brings, the vision he brings on the policies that he would bring, the change he would bring on healthcare, on education, on our foreign policy, on tax policies, I think are all welcome changes. I think with McCain, he's an honorable man. He served the country, but I do think that most of his policies are very much in line with what we've seen from the Bush administration the last 8 years, particularly on education, on healthcare, on tax policies, continuing tax breaks for the very wealthiest Americans to the detriment of the less well-off. And so I think Obama is going to bring fundamental change in all those areas. And I think that can only be good for the state of Massachusetts and for the communities of Winchester and Stoneham. We talked about health care, and a lot of the support that we get for our health care reform in Massachusetts and for our Medicaid program comes from the federal government. We're critically dependent on support from the federal government. Education's another example. One of the big challenges we have is special needs is not being adequately funded by our government, and that started with the federal government.
Yeah, unfunded
mandates, right, 20, 30 years ago. I'm confident that an Obama presidency and administration would do a lot more in the area of education funding, and that would start at the federal level, would come down to Massachusetts, and would trickle down to our communities. That would be huge, make a huge difference. I think Obama is serious about tackling our infrastructure in the country, crumbling roads, bridges, and everything else. We've got more than our share here in Massachusetts. I think if our federal government stepped up and was providing more resources and leadership, that would make a huge difference. And then, of course, in energy and environmental policies, we've had no leadership, very little from Washington in 8 years.
And sabotage,
there's no question. Now that I think would change also under a McCain administration, but certainly far more and far more quickly under Obama.
Well, also, I think McCain's been clear he would move much more to domestic energy, but that would be primarily moving to nuclear and very much less emphasis on alternative, non-hydrocarbon, non-nuclear, or nuclear, depending on how you pronounce it. Energy sources.
He also picked a running mate who doesn't believe in man-made, that man plays a role in global warming.
Oh, that's right. Well, perhaps she thinks it's women. Never mind. She certainly warmed up the
There's
planet a
something,
little herself.
we're about out of time with Jason, but I'd like to bring something up. There was a big story in Winchester this week that is very directly tied to the state budget. But of course, Deval Patrick, in the spot that he was, trying to clear $1 million or $1 billion from the state coffers, sliced a lot of programs, or at least funding for programs, and Winchester wasn't immune. This past week, we found out the Winchester Substance Abuse Coalition lost $50,000 of its $100,000 allocation at a time when substance abuse is probably getting ready to soar. You know, as it often does follow, recession and depression, and follows our moods as well. Also, the Sanborn House, it was $125,000 linked in. They're about to celebrate their 100th anniversary next month.
Yep.
The Historical Society has a lot of plans there, but they lost their total $125,000 line item. The also $15,000 was lost for invasive weed control at Winter Pond, and $25,000 for invasive weed control along the Upper Mystic Lakes, which
They should try along 93. It's,
you know,
it's pretty disgraceful too.
What do you think this is an example of? Do you think these were smart cuts? I mean, these cuts are of varying degrees, and I think arguments could be made for and against cutting anything from a budget. But how did you feel about the choices to cut these 4 programs specifically? And I don't know. How do you see how this is going to impact those?
And I mean, I was very upset to see these cuts. I mean, I understand what led the governor to do this, and certainly we're not being singled out. This is happening all over the state,
all across the state.
But I mean, for example, I was communicating with Dot Butler, who's very involved in the Substance Abuse Coalition, and in fact, tonight, right here at the high school, there's an event, Rachel's Challenge, which is being supported by our Substance Abuse Coalition, and there's so much important work that they do, and so reliant on these sources of funding. It's a $200,000 budget, and taking $50,000 out, it's 25% of the budget. So it's very hard to see this. And unfortunately, I think in the coming months, maybe even next year or two, there's going to be a lot of belt tightening. It's happening for families already. It's happening in local government. It's going to happen in state. And I think we're just going to all have to do our best to get through this. We're going to have to come together as a community, and we're going to have to make tough choices about our priorities. One of the things that I was pleased to see, that even in the face of $1 billion deficit and some very tough cuts like the ones we're taking here in Winchester and also in Stoneham, local aid and Chapter 70 money was not cut. And that, particularly in the middle of a fiscal year, is devastating for communities, because you've already set up a budget and you're depending on those funds from the state. And at least those were protected and were not cut in this.
Or at least for now, though.
At least for now. At least for now.
Well, we'll see what comes back out of Barney Frank's efforts.
Yes.
And what
Yes,
comes back.
hopefully
I
that
had
can
one
help us
last
get
question,
through.
actually. I was reminded because I happened to cast an absentee ballot because I'm going to be out of the country for the election, unfortunately. But I did cast my ballot. But I noticed there was a proposition on the ballot about the 1 ounce of cannabis, and essentially wasn't encouraging it so much as decriminalising it and turning it into a civil offence, I think. And I'll be quite open, I voted, I felt that was an okay move. I'm not, I think individual usage of drugs of that, at that level is hardly it should not be a criminal.
I think this may be the one issue that I've seen Jason backtrack on.
But I was curious to see what your view was.
You asked me about this issue when I was on the show last time. Was it, I don't know, a couple months ago? And
I think you must have.
And you did ask me. That's right. And at that time I was leaning in favor of this for the reasons that you cited, and because of the impact on, particularly for juveniles, having a record that can impact their ability to get a job and be productive citizens later on. I have done a lot more research since then, and I've talked with people in law enforcement locally at the state. I've talked to one of our DAs, and based on that and their advice to me, I will be now voting against number 2.
Just an argument, with the current fiscal strain that everybody's seeing. I know that there has been a concerted effort by district attorneys across the state to go against this ballot question.
Why are they so?
Well, you know what? I think
passionately against
Chad
it?
Riley summed it up pretty well as a former prosecutor. I think that law enforcement, they're worried about losing that leverage, that piece of leverage to hold over, small-time offenders, to either turn them against people they feel are larger offenders. I'm not saying that's really a bad idea, but at very least, there was a Harvard study done that really looked at just how much money is spent in the state of Massachusetts going after strictly arresting people for marijuana use. Something like $7 million that could be saved on an annual basis by the state government if they stopped prosecuting this. If police could say, okay, here's your fine, move along, they don't have to appear in court afterward.
Aren't there more serious crimes, crimes of violence, and these sort of things that are much more serious?
Well,
frankly,
and
DUIs.
this wouldn't be the only
which are
state
not
that
being picked up.
did it, but what was it that the district attorney or
Right.
who it was that advised you, what was it that they said that really
Well,
swayed you?
I think the first is that we do have to be very aware of what signals we're sending, particularly for our young people and our teenagers. And making a change like this does, whether we intend it to or not, does send a signal that this is not so bad. And that's, I think that's not the kind of signal that I want to send to my children or to our other youth. So I think that's first. I think second, at least based on all the research I've done, the claims of the costs that the state's incurring to prosecute these offenses are really not the case. That cases that are being actually pursued and prosecuted are not for a marijuana offense,
I
but
keep
for
hearing
another-
that, but there was a
Right.
Harvard study done that proved the other point. But it's just the word of several DAs that are arguing the counterpoint, but no study has been done and no real numbers have been thrown back.
Well, I haven't.
don't really
To be
understand
fair, I
that.
haven't seen this specific study, and I would
And DAs are
welcome looking at that. But
notoriously looking for leverage,
Yeah.
I
I don't
find
think it should
hard
be
to see the
decided
harm.
on whether that's there's a cost we're incurring or not. I think I think it's fair to say in the vast majority of cases when they're being prosecuted, it's because it's combined with another crime. Somebody who's high has also stolen a car or was also involved in a robbery.
Now, see, high is a
And,
different story.
right.
High and involved in driving an automobile, so that's driving under the influence. This is just possession, and I think that's the problem I have with it. I mean, possession of alcohol, possession of cigarettes, perfectly legal. Incredibly narcotic substances, incredibly damaging to their health, but they're individual choices. The same with possession of marijuana. The impact of driving under the influence, that's a different story. We don't do nearly enough to attack driving under the influence of alcohol either. So I think to me, it's not so much an absolute as a misallocation of resource, not dealing with the things that can truly cause other people harm.
And it's sort of
That's just an opinion.
one of those
I think
startling instances.
civilized people
of-
can disagree on
I think we
that
might.
part.
Well, absolutely, there are
There's certainly
interesting-
arguments on both sides.
I'd like to
And-
localize it though, just for a second, because I think a really good. I never really even considered this, but I had shared with somebody that we do the Winchester police logs every week, look through every single arrest, and just police report. I can't tell you how many times, at least 10, since I've been here, I've read reports from the Winchester Police Department that have basically said, okay, we caught this teenager, we caught this individual, this resident driving through town, smelled marijuana, found marijuana, let them go. Happens over and over again. But unfortunately, it's up to the police to decide at that moment whether or not to let you go. So then it comes down to who you know.
Yeah.
And to me, that's not equal application of the law. If some people are letting, they let some people skate by and not others. But definitely are interesting arguments on both sides.
But
I
that's a
think it's-
different issue, though,
It's
as
like
well.
vagrancy laws.
Right.
The vagrancy laws are used
Yes.
to hold people that
Yes.
they really think, well, they really shouldn't be here. Not equally applied, because if we all went around without our wallets, we'd all be vagrants,
Right.
technically, but they're not going to arrest us.
But I mean,
Yeah,
the point
it's
you
not-
raise is a very important one, but it's a bigger issue, which is that the law is not applied fairly to all people in all
Absolutely.
circumstances. I mean, certainly that's true
Which is
in many of our urban areas, right, and less well-off communities. So I think that's a bigger issue of applying the law fairly. The only other point I just wanted to add was I do think that some of the arguments about Corey reform that come up in the discussion of this issue are very valid, and I think that those should be pursued. I don't think it needs to be through a referendum, but through the legislative process.
That was one of the bases of Deval Patrick's running for office, and I really haven't heard much about Corey reform over the last 2 years. I mean, I guess there are a lot of things to deal with right now that I might have placed on the back
hopefully
burner.
this will
We've chewed
will
up
come up.
Plenty of
slightly
time.
gone
Next-
over
next year.
time, but
Okay.
I want to thank you for coming
Thank
on.
you.
Wish you the very best
Thank you.
for this upcoming election. It
you.
looks like from all the numbers that I'm sure you'll do very well.
Well, thank you for having me on, and I encourage everybody to go out and vote on November 4th.
Likewise, I think we join you in that. So we'll cut to a public service announcement, and then we'll be right back. Don't go away.
Hi, WinCam. My civic organization is having an event tomorrow. Can you send a staff member over to tape it?
Well, my Rotary Club is holding a special program this week, and we'd really love it if you could come down and cover it.
Here at WinCam, we get phone calls such as these every day. Unfortunately, our staff cannot cover every event. I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you or your organization how you can create your own public service announcement, cover your own event, or produce your own television show. All you need to do is have someone from your organization attend a producer's class where they'll learn everything necessary to create and produce a professional TV show. And that's what community television is all about. For more information on how to become a WinCam producer, call me, Don Cronin, at 781-721-2050, or email me at dcronin@wincam.org.
We're back. You're on Talk of the Town Live. My co-host here, Rory Schuler.
We're on Talk of the Town.
We're on Talk of the Town Live. That's right. Who did I say was on Talk of the Town Live?
Well,
Never mind.
I thought you were talking to the viewers.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, but we're back.
We're running a little short on time, but
Yes. So what would you like to cover now?
there's a lot in the news right now. Where to start? Well, why don't we hit the one ballot question that we didn't discuss, or at least the one very well publicized. I understand there's a fourth ballot question as well, almost nobody knows anything about.
Yes.
But the ballot question number 3, dog racing.
Oh, yes, I was a bit flummoxed by that one.
Well, before I took the job here,
I'm no fan of dog racing, but I wasn't ready to ban other
Me
people
either.
from doing it.
Exactly, me either. I lived in Taunton for a year before I moved to my current location. Right next door to Taunton is the Raynham dog racing track. It's the biggest one in the state, I think, arguably. But regardless, I visited there once just to see what it was like. It was a surreal experience, really bit strange. It's like you step back 3 decades, and
Yes.
the floor is littered and used betting slips, and it's very interesting. But I would like to throw something
Strictly
out there.
1930s?
Yeah, well, no, more the 70s, just by the style of dress and the way everything had a yellow tinge. That's just how I pictured the 70s for some reason. But I just would like to throw something out there, and this is something that I've heard a lot lately from dog trainers and even greyhound owners, and just from going to the track and seeing the animals race. It appears that these dogs love to race, that they absolutely love the thrill of it, and that's why I'll be voting. That is the one ballot question that I can easily say which way I'll be voting. I'm going to be voting to not
Admit them.
illegalize. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
it's fading on its own. It will eventually
Who's running
fade.
the campaign to get them made illegal? I don't know the background to it myself.
Well, I saw an interesting show on PBS, and I wish I could think of the name, but it's a animal rights organization, and I'm a dog lover. I absolutely
Yeah,
do love
like my whole
dogs.
family is.
It is somewhat sad that they are kept in small pens, warehouse style, but they do get out for a lot of exercise. It's really a tough topic, but all of the dogs aren't allowed to be euthanized in this state. There's a really healthy argument for saying that if dog racing is ended in this state, it'll simply move to another state where it is not nearly as well controlled. So perhaps for the dogs' happiness, maybe everybody should just think about that before they vote on that ballot question.
Yeah. Now, there was nothing on the ballot about casinos, was there?
No, I don't think so.
They didn't. Judge Valpatrick didn't try to, or anybody else come around that side of the issue.
I think they really ought to, though. I mean, I'm sick of driving to Connecticut.
Well, I was going to sort of deflect into the column I wrote last week. Which
What I'm
was
going to
the
do,
sting.
I'm going to drive to Connecticut and spend the money I saved after voting yes on ballot question 1.
I'm not sure that'll please all the teachers in town.
I'm sure it will.
You may have them coming after you. The column we wrote about the sting of the stock exchange, the
Yes.
sting of the markets.
Did you get that headline, by the way? I wasn't
Yes,
sure.
I did.
A
I
lot of
did.
people didn't get past the tenderizer, but that's just a reference to putting meat tenderizer on a bee sting. It dulls the pain.
Yes.
Okay, but
Yes.
I had some coworkers that didn't get that.
It's
Nobody's questioned it.
Nobody's questioned it.
But
But to that issue, you know, the interesting thing about all the objections to gambling, the gambling that goes on in the casinos in the state or any state are dwarfed by the gambling that we freely permitted and freely saw promoted by all the investment banks and everybody else that amounted to apparently trillions of dollars. In fact, just the credit default swaps in gross magnitude, not after they're netted down, they're talking about 4 or 5 times the entire GDP of the United States, in fact, roughly equivalent to the GDP of the world, something like 50 or 60 trillion dollars, netting down to $1 trillion. I don't think we're doing that with the casinos. My point of my column really was that we've allowed the economy to be the worst run casino of any, that we would never allow a casino to be so untransparent. We would never.
it's as if
allow-
somebody turned off the eye in the sky that watches all.
Absolutely, that turned off the rules.
Can the pit bosses.
Absolutely, it really, I thought it brought it home to me as I thought about this, how absurd it is that the most important game, which is the game of commerce and the markets we've created, we're left to completely lawless, opaque, uncontrolled chaos that threatened to really bring down the entire Western idea of capitalism and democracy.
We had a brief discussion prior to the show about antitrust laws, anti-monopoly laws. Antitrust laws, for some reason, over the last, say, 2 decades, have developed this reputation for being in place only to protect the American people from monopolies that may form. One business that has a total monopoly over everybody else can raise the price as high as they like. Nobody can do anything
Sort
about
of
it.
like Microsoft.
But
by example.
the true spirit of the antitrust laws was also put in place to keep any one corporation from growing so monstrously large that it can't fail, not without bringing down the tiers of government and all these other companies with them.
Yes.
Now, for some reason, we've promoted and promoted and
Well,
promoted
there were
that
fairness
as
as
big
well.
as possible is bigger the better.
Yes.
And maybe this is the proof that we were actually right a century ago.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the antitrust laws were never fully enforced. They were subverted from day one by the worst of the perpetrators, like John D. Rockefeller the first, when he had his trust dissolved in Ohio, simply moved to another state, started up again, and bribed all of the congressmen ruthlessly until he finally was broken up. But we've never really, as a country, gotten our arms around monopolies. I mean, we've tried. There's been efforts. There were efforts with Teddy Roosevelt. There were efforts again under the Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But really, particularly under this regime, and I don't think Clinton did a particularly good job in this subject either. There's been probably a 10, 12-year period where just absolutely anything went, and the behaviours. And I noticed, actually, I was reading the antitrust law just the other day from that new book, The Age of Tyranny, the Tyranny of Oil, that it also spoke about sovereign nations. I think we're being wound up. I think we've run out of our time.
We just started our discussion on sovereign
We were just
nations.
getting into this.
Yeah.
But we'll
Absolutely.
just have to wait till next time. And unfortunately, I'm going to be out of town, out of the country for the next one. So
We'll be off for a month.
We'll either be off for a month, or hopefully Kim Whitaker can join you and you can keep the show going while we're in that most important election season. I'm hoping so. But thank you again for joining us. And thank you again to Jason Lewis for joining us as special guest tonight. Thank you, Rory.
Thanks, Dave.
I hope to see you here next time. Next time, as I said, might be longer than I'd hoped for, but looking forward to it. But every Thursday night at 7 o'clock, you'll either see us live or a repeat. So thank you again. And
We're even
good
better
night,
the second
Winchester.
time. So